Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
As agencies experiment with new approaches to technology, finance, and acquisition, the rules that govern grants and contracts are changing too. The challenge is making sure oversight keeps pace with innovation. Professional Services Council President Stephanie Kostro joins me now with the latest take on these issues. Stephanie, great to have you on this morning.
Thanks, Terry, for having me.
We've been talking today about how the federal government is expanding its role from buyer to investor as a way to speed the development of new technologies. It's also revamping its relationship with grantees. From your perspective there at PSC, what's driving the change in the uniform guidance that's out now?
Well, thanks for asking this question, Terry, because this proposed rule came out of the Office of Management and Budget weeks ago. It actually came out in late May, and comments are due yesterday. And so this is very fresh in my mind here. And that is to say, this proposed rule on federal financial assistance does tackle the uniform guidance, or what we used to call uniform guidance. What OMB is trying to do is to take some of the big moving pieces that were in uniform guidance and put them into regulation. So there were lots and lots of clauses for us to comment on the sort of question of moving from customer to investor or getting skin in the game. It's a really interesting take on grants and cooperative agreements, what we loosely call federal financial assistance. So it's not a contract, but a lot of contractors are involved as partners to research institutions, R&D centers, nonprofits, and different kinds of organizations. And so this is a really interesting take, what OMB is trying to do here with what was used to be called the uniform guidance.
And what has industry seen as the biggest changes, or where did you find the biggest opportunity for comment?
So what I find interesting, there are, I would say, at least three things, Terry, that jumped out to me immediately. One is that this proposed rule would prohibit fixed price or fixed amount grants. This is it's a direct difference from where we're going with contracts. You may recall, Terry, that there was an executive order, and now there's additional activity happening to move to contracts to fixed price contracts. And so what jumped out at me about this proposed rule is that it takes using the same rationale for transparency, accountability, oversight, is actually saying we can't do, or we shouldn't do, fixed amount grants. So that did jump out to us. And that's important for a few reasons. You know, a lot of these research institutions, or those who receive federal financial assistance in this way, don't have the cost compliance structures that have built up like contractors do. And so this is something that they're going to struggle with. So it's certainly something we commented on. The second is major piece about accountability is talking about what those partnering relationships look like: recipients, subrecipients, partners, how contractors come to play in terms of grants management. So that jumped out to me as well. And then finally, and I mentioned this earlier, which is this had been guidance before. There's no basis in statute. So OMB is going and putting this into regulations without a statutory basis. And that jumped out at me as something that, with the revolutionary FAR overhaul, trying to strip down the FAR and federal regulations to anything based in statute, this is a little bit of a departure from that approach.
It really does sound like the two sides of grants and contracts are taking a different approach here.
It does seem that way, and it's something that we've highlighted in our comments that we submitted by the deadline of July 13th. And so, we are working with OMB and the agencies to figure out what right looks like here. Industry is a key player in this domain, along with grant recipients and those who are operating under cooperative agreements. And so the universe is small. There are a lot of stakeholders. There are hundreds of thousands of comments already submitted. And so OMB is going to have its work cut out for itself when it goes through all of this.
Stephanie Kostro is the president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, let's take another regulatory role right now, another regulatory look. GSA is collecting feedback on its proposed AI safeguarding clause. What's the concern here that industry most wants government to understand before that clause becomes final?
There is a lot happening in this space, Terry, and you may recall you and I had a conversation back in March when GSA released its initial version of this clause, and they got lots and lots of comments on that one as well. As we move through, it's it's an interesting take on it. This version that we are reviewing right now came out on June 17th. It is much more narrowly focused than the March version was. And this one focuses on a couple of key differences between the March version and this version. This clause currently would replace a strict foreign ban on AI for large language models with a U.S. incorporation preference, right? To skew towards more of a Buy America or American-made preference. This is in reinforcement of an executive order about U.S. leadership in AI. So we're not surprised by this one. Another deviation from, although it's contracting, I shouldn't say deviation, right? That's a term of art. I'll say another difference from the March version is that it adds an emphasis on, quote, unbiased AI principles. So we're unpacking that as well. And then finally, there are some strict human access limits talking about government data ownership and use restrictions. That is something, intellectual property is always something that resonates with the contracting community about who owns what and under what licensing agreements can and should it be shared.
Stephanie, there's a listening session on this rule today. What are you hoping to hear there? And what is PSC looking for as this rule gets finalized?
Industry was very excited to understand that GSA was hosting both an in-person and virtual listening session here on July 14th. And we are hoping to learn a little bit about the origin, what the intent is, and what the rollout and enforcement requirements will be. Comments are due August 3rd, the written comments are. And so we at PSC are going to have a session just for our member companies in the days following today's listening session to talk about what contractors should do. Things like both contractors and their supply chain participants looking at their large language model arrangements and considering comments on provisions that would burden operational or compliance requirements. That said, when we commented in March, I suspect our comments are going to be similar in a couple of veins. One is we don't want to limit commercial AI solutions and innovation. And so we're going to be listening today for that kind of commentary from GSA. We don't want policies to conflict with other AI guidance coming out from OMB and agencies themselves. And then finally, we don't want a one-size-fits-all. These companies are evolving very, very quickly. Their technology is evolving very, very quickly. And we don't want to hamstring American industry in artificial intelligence because there is such a race globally to be a leader in this space.
It's certainly going to be an important session today, but let's turn our attention to one more acquisition issue here. GAO's released its latest annual assessment on DoD acquisition reform, and it, maybe not surprisingly, finds that DoD continues to struggle with delays even as it's pursuing acquisition reform. From your perspective, what's keeping those reforms from translating into faster fielding of capabilities?
Terry, you've heard me say this before. If last year, if 2025 was the year of efficiency, 2026 is both the year of innovation and the year of speed. And we've heard folks like Secretary Hegseth and others talk about quicker delivery time, shorter delivery windows to get technologies and solutions in the hands of warfighters. This is GAO's 24th annual weapons systems assessment, and the timelines are growing. And it's amazing to me that for some major defense acquisition programs, we are looking at 12 years to go from conceptualization to fielding some of this essential equipment and solutions. And so, what is getting in the way of this? A lot of it is bureaucracy. A lot of it is requirements are changing. And so therefore, you've got to add engineering change orders or you've got to put in additional time windows. I think part of it is we have a tendency over time to let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. And we really need to focus on, as we're going through development cycles, what is good enough to move forward? It may not be perfect, but we have time to get it perfect. But let's not hold up the entire value chain or the entire delivery schedule just on that. And so I think if you look at some of the programs that GAO highlighted, you'll see exactly what I mean here in terms of the T-7 jet training program. We're looking at hypersonic attack cruise missiles. We're looking at air defense, long-range hypersonic weapons. These are huge programs. They're going to be snags, but how do we move quickly? And I don't think we have the agility here. And certainly we don't have the acquisition workforce in the same way we did a while ago. And I think the department is doing everything it can to hire into those positions so that we can move faster.
Stephanie, thanks for kind of taking us back to where we started, which is one of the ways the government is trying to get after that speed is by investing sooner in the development process. So we'll see how this all turns out.
I'm waiting with bated breath. And to the extent that, a trade association like PSC and our sister associations can feed into this and be helpful, I think it's going to be essential. A lot of stakeholders in this area, and I think we all deserve to be heard. We have great ideas, and it's a way that we can move forward together.
Stephanie Kostro is president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.